Hi, I'm Don. Welcome to the Woodsmith Shop. You know, a router table is one of the most important tools in the shop, and it's one of the major tools you can build yourself. Well, on today's show, you'll see how to make a top for your router table out of ordinary building materials. Then you'll see how to mount an insert plate in that top so it's absolutely flush. Next, we'll go over some of our favorite accessories for a router table, T-track and a feather board. And we're going to wrap it all up with a few more accessories that make your router table more convenient and safer. I'm ready to start building a router table, so stick around for the Woodsmith Shop. Okay guys, we've said it many times before, a router table is an essential tool for the shop.
That's right. It helps you get a lot more done than just a handheld router alone.
Yep.
When you think about it, a router table is a pretty simple tool. It's just a base, a fence, and a tabletop.
You know, my first router tabletop was just a piece of plywood, but it didn't take long for the weight of the router to make that top sag.
Well, I know what you're talking about. A top has to be strong enough to support the router and then large enough to support all the work pieces too.
That's right.
You know, one good option for the top is to buy one. You can get everything from a simple MDF top to thick phenolic plastic. There's even cast iron tops available.
Well, manufactured tops are a good option. They have a lot of built-in features, but they can get a little pricey.
Yeah, that's a good point. Fortunately, you can make your own router tabletop that's just as solid as a manufactured one. And best of all, it's not going to cost you much at all.
Well, it's the way I'd like to go.
Me too, and what I like about it is that you can build it from common materials, just MDF and some plastic laminate.
It all starts with a good plan. Well, if you'd like a plan for the router tabletop we're going to build today, along with a base and a fence, just go to our website, woodsmithshop.com.
Well, Terry, let's get started on that top.
Sounds good. Let's go, Phil. Hey, Phil.
You know, Terry, when making a router tabletop, it's got to have three things for me. It's got to be flat, smooth, and it's got to be solid to absorb vibration.
You're right. MDF is the perfect choice. It's all three of those things, plus it's really inexpensive.
You know, when you find MDF in the home center, most of the time it's going to be 3/4 of an inch thick. That's a little too thin for me.
So the solution is to glue up 2 layers of MDF, but the edges have to be perfectly flush, and that's not easy to do.
No, and maneuvering a piece this heavy and awkward on the table saw is not a good idea.
So the solution, start by cutting one piece to finish size.
Yeah, and then the second piece is cut a little oversized, and then they can be glued together.
Then we can use a router and a flush trim bit, which is a straight bit with a bearing on the top, to route the edges perfectly flush.
If you'd like to see a video tip on using a flush trim bit, just go to our website, woodsmithshop.com.
Okay, Phil, let's flip this over and we can make some sawdust. If you want to clamp that down, fire up the router, got your glasses on.
Terry, that flush trim bit does a great job of making those two edges perfectly flush.
Yeah, it does. Now all I got to do is turn this around and route the other 3 sides.
Okay.
Well, Phil, I got the top all routed nice and flush.
And now we want to hide those edges and make them a little bit more durable by gluing on some wood strips. Here we're using poplar.
You know, it can be a real challenge gluing on all 4 pieces at one time. They have a tendency to slide around a little bit. So I like to glue on one piece at a time. I'll start by gluing on the pieces on the ends, and then add a piece here to the front and another one to the back.
Yeah, and before gluing them on, you want to round over that front corner. That's going to soften it, and so you won't have to run into a sharp corner later on.
That's right. Well, we're ready to start gluing. Let you do the honors. Well, Phil, once the edging is glued in place, the next step is to add the laminate.
The laminate's going to add a smooth, durable work surface that a workpiece slides across easily.
That's right. And I've got 2 pieces of laminate here because we want one piece on the bottom side as well.
That's going to balance out the construction, and it's going to keep the top from warping or sagging.
Now, the laminate is cut just slightly oversized, and then I'm going to use contact cement to glue it together.
Yeah, with this kind of adhesive, you want to apply glue to both the top and the underside of the laminate, then let it dry.
And once those pieces touch, they're going to be glued together permanently.
And that's good news and bad.
That's right. You need to get the pieces into position without them touching.
Yeah, once the glue is dry, I'm going to put down a couple of wood strips on the top.
That. Now you can slide the laminate into position, making sure that it overhangs the sides, and then pull out one of the strips and push the laminate down.
Then pull out the remaining strips, making sure you keep a nice contact between them.
Yeah, now with this kind of adhesive, it's really important that you get it pressed down really well and pressed in place.
Right, there's a special tool for that that's called a J-roller.
Or you can just use a block of wood like this.
Now once that's done, we can flip the whole top over and do the same thing to the other side.
Well, Phil, we've got the laminate attached to the top and the bottom of the router table. Now all we have to do is trim it flush.
Yeah, and for that, once again, we're going to use a router and a flush trim bit.
Here, go for it and let me get out of the way. Well, Phil, once you get the laminate trim flush, we can soften that sharp edge with one of these, a chamfer bit.
And we got ourselves a rock-solid router tabletop.
Well, Terry, this router tabletop you guys built looks good and sturdy.
Yeah, it came out pretty good.
Now, all we need to do is mount the router to the top.
Now, you could do what I used to do, which is screw the router up from underneath.
There's a better solution, and that's to use an insert plate like this.
Well, the insert plate mounts to the router base itself, and then this whole assembly just slides right down into the router tabletop.
You know, you can make your own insert plate, but in this case, I actually prefer to buy one.
Right, and when you're doing that, a couple good choices: aluminum, phenolic. They don't sag, they're strong. But if you got a really heavy router, steel plate's the best choice.
Well, and these manufactured plates come with insert rings that have different size openings to fit the router bit you're going to use.
You know, no matter what plate you decide on, you still have to get the plate into the router tabletop.
And that means cutting an opening to match the insert plate exactly.
Well, that's actually pretty easy. Brian, let's get in the shop and get to work. Okay, Brian, we've got to get this insert mounted in this tabletop.
Yep, and that means we're going to have to cut a hole in the top.
Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. You could just position the insert, then trace around it, and cut a hole.
Right, but going through a top like this and spend a lot of time sanding and shaping to get it fit just right, it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, and if you blow the cut, then you have to make a whole new top.
And we don't want to spend time making a new top.
No. There is a better way to do that.
And that's to use a template like this one.
Well, the inside of the template is cut to fit the exact size of the insert.
And once the template's done, we can use that to create the opening.
Well, you do that in combination with a router and a pattern bit. Now, this pattern bit has a bearing at the top and a cutting edge exactly in line with the bearing. So as the bearing follows the inside edge of the template, it makes an exact duplicate.
Now, making a template like this isn't all that difficult. Just starts with a 1/4-inch piece of hardboard.
Well, and then all we have to do is put the insert on top, get it exactly positioned, and then trace along the outside edge of the template. When we remove it, now we have to remove the inside of this some way.
You know, and that's pretty easy with a jigsaw.
But we've got to get the jigsaw started some way.
I'm ahead of you there, Don. I've got
Okay.
a blank here with some starter holes drilled in the corners.
Well, and the starter holes are positioned so the edge of the hole is just inside the layout line.
And we want to stay inside the layout line so we can fine-tune the fit as we go.
Well, I think we're ready to cut this out, so we'll get the top out of the
we
way
go.
here a little bit.
And I'm just going to grab my jigsaw and cut. Well, that completes the cut.
Well, we've got the template now cut to rough shape so that the cut is just inside the layout line.
You know, all we need to do now is a little final shaping to get it to fit just right. And put this in the vise.
And to do the shaping, we just need some files. And then as we get closer, we can just use sandpaper to get right up to the line.
And as we get close, we want to make sure we do a little test fitting.
Well, and for that, we want to use the actual insert to test the fit all along both edges.
Right, and once we got the edges good, then we can work on the corners and fine tune those.
Okay, there's a little trick there. We use a dowel wrapped with adhesive-backed sandpaper, and that works great in the corners.
Knocks off the rest of those edges in the corners. Okay, I think that's pretty good for the template, Don.
Okay, Brian, let's just give it one last test fit here. Get the insert in place, and oh, that's a good snug
It is
fit.
good.
That's going to work great for cutting the opening in the tabletop.
Now, one thing we want to make sure of is that opening is in the right spot.
Right.
So we're going to take the template and center it side to side.
And in this case, the template has to be 3 inches from the front edge. So
There we go.
I've got
That looks pretty good.
Okay,
Let's
once
hold that.
that's done, we'll just use a pencil to do another layout line around the inside of the template. This will give us a chance to cut a rough opening in the tabletop itself.
Right. And we're going to do that just like we did before. I'm going to take my drill, go with a set of starter holes, just big enough for the jigsaw blade. Then I'm going to cut the rough opening, staying just inside the layout line. Okay, well, that takes care of the cut. Let's kind of take a look here.
Let's lift that out. Oh, well, we've got the opening cut to rough size now.
Right. Now we need to match it to the insert plate.
Well, that's where this template really comes into play. While you were cutting, I put double-sided tape on the back of the template. I'll peel off this last piece here. And then we have to put the template right over the layout line that we had before.
Looks pretty good there. And we want to make
down
sure
on it.
we
There it is.
push
Press it down.
nice and tight. Don't want to move it while we're routing.
Okay.
Speaking of that, I'll grab the router and bit.
Okay, now we've got the bit set, so the height of the bit, the bearing on the bit rides right against the edge of the template.
Okay, I guess I'm ready to route. Well, that takes care of a first pass around our opening.
Well, and it looks really good, Brian. We've got the inside face of this opening exactly flush with the template, just what we wanted. The only problem is we've got a little bit of a ledge here because we couldn't go quite deep enough.
Right. You know, I can take care of that. I'll just set this for a deeper cut so I can route completely through the top.
Except we don't want to go into the bench,
Oh, that's
so
for
we're going to
sure.
add a couple of sticks here to raise this top up a little bit.
Right, and I'll keep it clear of the bench top. And the other thing is, we can remove the template.
Right. Now we can pull that off, and once it's off, the bearing will actually ride against the face that you just cut and complete it to full depth.
Right. Well, if you'll take care of prying that off,
Okay.
I'll start routing.
Hi guys, nice job on getting the opening to fit the insert.
Oh, thanks, Jerry.
Yeah, but it needs to be flush with the tabletop.
You know, there's a simple solution to that, and it's just a wood strip screwed to the sides of the opening, couple screws, you adjust, perfectly flush.
Well, that's a good shop solution, but there are some manufactured levelers. They just mount to the bottom of the tabletop, and then there's a screw that adjusts so that the plate is level flush with the tabletop.
You know, there's another version. It mounts into the corner of the opening. And then there's a couple of set screws here that you adjust to get the plate level.
Right. You know, no matter what leveling system you go with, there's still one more thing we got to
Well,
do.
we've got to mount this plate to the router itself.
Now, sometimes the plates come pre-drilled for in the router, so all you have to do is screw it on.
Right. Other plates, like this one, we're going to have to drill some holes.
Well, there's several holes here, and they all have to be in the right position. So let's head over to the bench and get that done. Well, Brian, all routers come with a base already, but we need to switch out that base for the insert plate.
Right. And, you know, and before we just go ahead and screw it in place anywhere, there's a couple things we want to consider.
Well, you want to get the plate oriented to the controls that you have on the router that you want to be able to get to.
Right. And for this particular router, that's the height adjust and locking mechanism. So now we've got that located, we just flip this plate over. And this particular plate comes with a centering guide. Makes locating that very, very easy. I'm just going to get
Well,
that
here, let me
aligned
help
here.
you tape that down.
Okay.
We'll get one side here.
Okay. Now I'll get the other side.
And then in order to drill the holes, we're actually going to use the base as a guide. Well, I've gone ahead and attached double-sided tape to the bottom of the base here. I'll get these pieces pulled off, and we'll just flip it over on that centering guide
Okay.
the same way we just did.
There we go. And the rings that are on the centering guide make it really easy to get centered up just right there. That looks pretty good. I'm just going to stick that down. All right.
Now, once that's in place, we can go over to the drill press and use the base itself as a guide to drill 3 holes to mount the router to the insert plate.
And for this particular router, a couple of access holes for the height adjust and locking mechanism. Well, Don, I've taken care of drilling all those holes in the insert plate.
Well, they look good, and I see you've added a nice little feature here.
Yeah, I've used a countersink bit like this to make sure the screws stay flush or slightly below the surface so they're out of the way.
Well, speaking of the screws, now we can just drop them into place and screw the insert plate to the router base and go all the way around. Okay, now we just drop this whole insert plate right into the tabletop.
And it's good fit and nice and flush.
It looks good. Just a couple more things to do.
Right. Add our insert ring.
And that gets screwed into place. And then we've got 4 screws at each of the corners to mount the insert plate to the top, and we've pretty much got a router table.
It's looking really good at this point.
Hey Dave, Brian and I have got this insert mounted to the tabletop. Now there's just a few more things we need to do to make it a router table.
Yeah, and one of the most important is adding one of these, a fence.
Well, this is a shop-built fence that we designed specifically for this router table.
You know, and a fence is really critical to most operations because it provides 2 surfaces to guide the workpiece. So you get more accurate cuts when controlling both the location and depth of cut.
Yeah, and this one has a couple of nice features built in, and one is dust collection. Keeps a lot of those chips from flying around.
You know, another great feature is T-track. Allows you to mount accessories like bit guards.
To make this table even more useful, we've added another track in the table surface.
Well, it's a dual track, so it allows you to use a miter gauge to guide a workpiece whenever you need to.
Yeah, and in the other side it has a T-track that's just like the one in the fence. And with those in place, you can mount all kinds of accessories, like this one, a featherboard.
And you can put one on the front to guide the workpiece as well.
Just better ways to get greater control on just about any cut.
Whenever I'm working at the router table, featherboards are an essential tool. They're like an extra set of hands that helps keep the workpiece securely against the table and the fence. They really make your routing more accurate and safer. Now, there's a couple of different types available. Some, like this one, have flexible fingers. They flex when the workpiece goes by, and that holds it in place and keeps it from pushing back. Others, like this one, have pad feet. They don't put as much pressure on, but they still hold the workpiece firmly in position. And once you have your featherboards, you of course need a way to mount them to the router table. When I'm mounting them to the fence, I like to have a piece of T-track. It'll accept either a T-bolt, like this one, that just slides in, or a regular hex bolt. The way you can position the featherboard anywhere along the length of the fence and just tighten it down. Now for the table, we've installed a little bit different track here. It's a combination T-track and miter track, so you've got options for mounting. Some featherboards come with these wedge blocks. They slide in the miter track, but then when you tighten them down, they lock in place so that they can't move. Now that you know how to mount them, the question is always where. Whenever I'm working with a wide piece, it's easy to control by hand, and I can keep it against the fence, but I want to put pressure to hold it down against the table. So I'll bring a featherboard in, put it in the fence, and slide it in place right over the top of the bit. Now it holds it down at that critical area, plus it kind of acts as a guard to keep my hands away from the bit. And people always wonder how much pressure the featherboard should exert. And they really tend to crank them down, and that makes it difficult to push the workpiece through. Really, the fingers don't have to flex very much to do their job. So just put it over the workpiece, push down a little bit to flex those fingers, and tighten the knobs. Now that's plenty of pressure to hold that down, but I can still slide it through easily, and I know I'll get a good cut. For a narrow piece, it can be hard to get your hands up there, plus I don't really want them that close to the bit. So in that case, I'll bring in a second featherboard and put it on the table. This one fits in the miter track, and I'll do the same thing. Put it right in front of the bit, put on a little pressure to flex the fingers, and then tighten it down. Now that workpiece is held securely to the table and to the fence, and I can push it through and get a great cut. But the one problem you can see is that it's hard to get my hands in there. So I always keep a scrap piece like this thin cutoff around, and I can use that as a push stick to push the workpiece through, and I know I'll get a great cut every time. So you can see it takes a little more setup to use featherboards, but it's definitely worthwhile to make routing on a router table safer and more accurate.
When I'm working on a small project and I need to glue up a wide panel from a couple smaller workpieces, sometimes you can end up with a gap between the joints, and it doesn't make a very attractive or a very strong glue joint. And these pieces are a little bit too small to run safely through a power joiner, so instead I'll rely on a good old-fashioned hand plane like this one. Now to do that, I'll just fold these workpieces up sort of like a book and get those edges kind of nice and flush, and bring those pieces over and clamp them in my bench vise. Now what's nice about this technique is that as I'm planing these edges flush and straight, I don't have to worry so much about my plane tilting to one side or the other, because as you'll see in a minute, those edges will align perfectly. So I'll go ahead and start planing. And I'm just going to work those edges down until they're flush and straight. That looks pretty good. So now I just bring those pieces back up to the bench, unfold them, and place them together like so. Now you can see that I've got a perfect tight joint for the perfect panel. Well, if you've been woodworking for any length of time, you know that dents and dings are just a fact of life. I've got one here in this workpiece I've cut for a project, but I'm not going to throw it away. I'm actually going to try to get that dent to come out. The technique I use is a little heat and a little steam and a little moisture to help swell those wood fibers out so that I can sand it smooth and actually get that dent to come out. What I'll do is I'll take a rag and dip it in some water just to get the rag a little damp. I don't want it soaking wet. Squeeze out all the excess. Then I'm just going to lay it over the dent. Then I'm going to take an old iron, and here's another tip. Get one from a garage sale. Don't use the one out of the house. It'll just save peace in the family that way. So now I'm just going to put some heat on that and work it in, and just check your progress occasionally to see if that dent's going to come out. All right, well, let's check our progress here. That's looking pretty good. I think with a little bit of sanding, this workpiece is saved, and so is the project.
A common problem with a lot of miter gauges is they fit a little loose in the slot, which can lead to an inaccurate cut. But there is an easy solution to that problem. And that's to use some of this. This is called foil tape, and you can find it at any hardware stores. It's got an adhesive back to it, so you just lay the tape along the edge of the miter gauge. It's kind of fussy a little bit, but not too bad. Smooth it all out, and then use a sharp utility knife or X-Acto knife and clean it up a little bit there. Smooth it out nice. Let's see how it fits. Perfect, no slop at all. Easy way to make your miter gauge fit the slot perfectly.
If you'd like to see more video tips like the ones you've just seen, go to our website, woodsmithshop.com. Well, guys, we saw a lot of accessories for the router table top. There's a few more accessories for the table itself.
Hey, you know, one of the ones that I've added to my router table is an on-off switch like this. Now I don't have to reach all the way under the router table to get the switch on the motor.
Yeah, you know, and that big switch is really easy to find, so I can stay focused on the task at hand.
Well, it's good, and one of the ones I like are leg levelers at the bottom of the table.
Yeah, the adjustable pads keep your router table stable so it's not going to shift during a cut.
Yes.
You know, those are great ideas. I also like to add a start pin. It's small, but really effective anytime I'm using profile bits or working with curved pieces.
Well, all three of these add both convenience and safety. Anytime you have a safe cut, you have a good cut. Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's show. We saw how to make a solid, inexpensive router table top, how to mount the insert plate, and then a few accessories to improve the performance of your router table. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time in the Woodsmith Shop.